Hi, everyone. Welcome, welcome. Thank you so much for being with us today. We're very excited to have you all here. My name is Balqis. I'm the founder and executive director of Youth Transforming Narratives, and I warmly welcome all of you with us today. We'll wait for about 1 or 2 more minutes just to make sure that everyone is able to connect and catch up with us, and we'll start in just 2 minutes. In the meantime, I would really like if you can introduce yourselves in the chat, tell us where you're joining us from today, and what you're looking forward to in this session, and then we'll start. All right. I think we can go ahead and start with our event. I'm very, very, very excited to welcome you to our very first launch of our very first policy brief. This is really a moment to celebrate, to reflect, and most importantly, to ignite action. We want this event to be more than just a launch. We want it to be a chance for all of you to connect and to learn about our work and why this work is very important. Today, we are proudly presenting to all of you, as you're seeing in the slide, navigating decolonization landscapes and youth-led movements, current practices and challenges, which is truly a testament to the power of young people in shaping just and inclusive societies. Really, like I said at the beginning, this is not only a policy brief, it's a call to rethink, to reimagine, and to reclaim the spaces where decisions are being made. Young people are not only the leaders of tomorrow, we are the change makers of today, and we are the leaders of today. And so through this work, we are proving that our voices, knowledge, and movements are shaping the world in real time. Again, so excited to welcome all of you. Please get ready for a very inspiring conversation, for fresh insights, for a bold vision for the future. Like we always say here at YTN, the journey to decolonization and meaningful youth leadership is really just the beginning, and we're making history together. And I hope we'll continue doing that in the next few months, not only through our event. Next slide, please. Great. So just some housekeeping items before we move forward. Please mute yourself and turn your cameras on if your connection allows, especially remain muted because that will interrupt the flow of the conversation. So please be careful with that. Would also love to see all of you. If you are in a good zone where you have a good internet connection, please make sure that if you can at least turn your camera on. Please post your questions in the chat at any time, and we'll be adding reminders to that because we'll be having a Q&A session at the end. You do have English closed captioning. It's at the CC button at the bottom of your screen, so you can turn that on. And finally, the meeting is being recorded. So if you remain in the event, it means that you agreed to be recorded. And we sometimes do snippets of this for our social media record as well, just for you all to have a heads up. Next slide, please. All right, so for today's agenda, we'll be going through a quick introduction of YTN. Then we'll be talking about the policy brief and why we chose to work on it. Then we'll have a quick presentation on the policy brief that is led by our amazing policy team. We'll do a Q&A shortly at the end, and then we'll wrap up. Next slide, please. Okay, so for the new people, welcome. If you don't know what Youth Transformation Narratives is, so we are a global movement of young people led by young people for young people who are committed to redefining global responses to the world's most pressing issues. Our work principles are decolonization, localization, youth leadership, and we are determined to change the narrative, take the lead in transforming the current existing structures that clearly are not working for anyone anymore, and bridge the South-North gap so that we can reshape future engagement. Our mission is really one that believes in the need to decolonize peace and security and the skills and potential of young people to lead that process, especially those who come from global majority countries. We want to provide young people with the space, the digital platform, the inclusive space, the diverse opportunities to strengthen their capacities in doing so, in changing, current geopolitics and actively and positively participating in transforming their communities. We do envision a world where the South-North gap does not really exist, where young people are meaningfully engaged in decision making, and where global responses to our local issues are based on insights from our own local communities themselves. There's a lot more information about this on our website, so I invite you all to check it to learn more. Next slide, please. Great. Our scopes of work are on international peace and security, youth and gender and leadership. So these are the main themes that we work around. And you'll see through our work in the future as well that they really all intersect. And so we don't just work on one scope for a period of time, we work on all of them collectively. Next slide, please. So our work pillars also define our teams, which is why when you go to our website, when you go under team, you'll see that we have different teams and amazing volunteers within each one of them. And our work pillars are around research and knowledge production, capacity building programs and training, policy change and intergenerational dialogue, which is the team that we have with us today, community building, advocacy and campaigning, and finally, youth peace and security programming, advocacy, and implementation. Next slide, please. So our strategic goals are decolonization, engagement, youth leadership, community building, and policy change and intergenerational dialogue. The idea here is that we see decolonization and the mission itself as really more of a journey than the end goal. And because it's very interdisciplinary, we think at YTN that approaching it from these different angles will complement each other and hopefully eventually will lead us to arrive to a greater good and implement our mission and vision. Next slide, please. So you might ask yourself, why this policy brief? Why this topic? Why a policy brief? And why now? The idea behind it really stems from the fact that, decolonization remains a very pivotal process in dismantling colonial legacies that still persist until today in social, political, economic, and cultural systems, especially in countries that are from the global majority. And despite significant progress, there are still challenges that hinder the effectiveness of decolonization. And I'm sure you've all either been through them or heard about them, from power imbalances in funding to marginalization of local voices to cultural hegemony, and many, many more that impact dependency and inequity. Also, there are gaps in representation within governance structures. There's also a lack of structural reforms. And all these intersect as well in hindering the progress of decolonization. Because we believe that because this is the core of our mission, and we believe there is a huge need to tackle it. We think that systematic barriers must be addressed to empower youth as meaningful agents of change. And this is exactly what the policy brief talks about. It recommends concrete actions to advance decolonization through youth-led efforts. And so it is our way to respond to these gaps through specifically policy work. But of course, as YTN, like I said, we work on many different pillars. We'll continue to address these gaps through many different angles as well. Next slide, please. So I'm very happy to first of all share that the policy brief is now live on our website. And Ibtisam from our team will be sharing the link if you want to quickly look at it. You can download it in a PDF version, and you can go through it in your own time. Would also love to hear any feedback that you have. So feel free to email it to us if you have any. And today I have the immense pleasure to welcome our policy team who has worked tirelessly for the past few months to get this done. Unfortunately, two of them are not able to be with us today due to personal emergencies, but I wanted to introduce the team regardless. We have Cynthia Brain, who's our policy lead. She's from the US. We have Margarita, who's a policy officer from Italy. Shital, also a policy officer from India. And finally, we have Surafel, a policy officer from Ethiopia. Today in the call, we have with us Shital and Margarita, who will be presenting the policy brief. And I'm going to give them now the floor I think we're starting with Shital, who will be presenting herself, and then we'll give the floor to Margarita to continue with the presentation. I really hope you enjoy it. We'll be here in case you have any questions. And yeah, the floor is yours, Shital.
Thank you so much, Balkis. Hello, everyone. My name is Sheetal Joshi. I'm a strategic communicator and conflict researcher specializing in post colonialism, crisis communication, and peace building. My work has spanned in advocacy, strategic communication, policy research with experience in organizations like Youth Transforming Narratives and International Crisis Group. And I am currently based in Brussels. Through my research and published work, I have explored decolonial processes, post-colonial conflicts, and the structural challenges within global governance. Today, I'm here to present this policy brief, which examines youth-led decolonization efforts, existing gaps, and the actionable steps needed to drive real change. Let's dive in. To begin with, what do we mean by decolonization? Too often, it is narrowly understood as simply gaining political independence. But decolonization is much more than that. At YTN, we define it in a way that reflects both structural and epistemic changes that need to happen. Yes, it includes sovereignty and the removal of colonial rule, but it also demands the deconstruction of economic, cultural, and political systems that were shaped by colonialism and continue to marginalize communities today. Decolonization is not just about the past, it is about addressing how colonial structures persist in our global systems today. It means reclaiming knowledge, shifting power, and ensuring that governance, education, and economics reflect the voices of local people rather than external influences. Historically, after World War II, there were massive waves of decolonization. Yet, despite this, the legacies of colonial rule remain deeply entrenched. Next slide, please. While several international frameworks were established to address these issues, they often struggle with the effectiveness due to global geopolitical pressures and systemic inequalities. Let's take a closer look at four key initiatives and obstacles they face. First, the UN Special Committee on Decolonization, also known as the C24, was created to oversee decolonization processes worldwide. While its mandate includes monitoring non self governing territories and supporting self determination, its impact is limited. Geopolitical interests, particularly from former colonial powers, continue to shape its effectiveness. Economic neocolonial structures, such as resource extraction and trade imbalances, remain intact, reinforcing independency rather than true autonomy. On the African continent, the African Union introduced Agenda 2063, a visionary policy aimed at fostering economic transformation, regional integration, and self sufficiency. It represents a hopeful roadmap for Africa's future, but progress has been hindered by internal governance issues. Corruption, social economic disparities, and political instabilities created roadblocks that slow meaningful implementation. Without stronger accountability mechanisms, the goal of the Agenda 2063 risks remaining aspirational rather than transformative. On the European continent, the European Union too has framed its post colonial engagement as an effort to foster equitable partnerships, particularly through the EU Africa strategy and political coherence for development. While these frameworks claim to support mutual prosperity, they often continue to prioritize economic, European prosperities and geopolitical interests. Trade agreements, for instance, frequently place African economies in a subordinate node, reinforcing patterns of dependency rather than fostering true independence. If decolonization is meant to be meaningful, these partnerships must shift towards a genuine reciprocity and agency. Finally, the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues was established to advocate for indigenous rights, land protection, and cultural preservation. It plays a crucial role in amplifying indigenous voices at the international level, yet its ability to enforce change is limited. Many governments fail to integrate its recommendations into national policies, making implementation inconsistent. Therefore, indigenous communities continue to face land dispossession, environmental degradation, and exclusion from decision making processes. Next slide, please. Now, while decolonization has made progress, there are still major challenges that prevent us from achieving meaningful, lasting change. I want to highlight six key obstacles that youth led movement like ours encounter in this struggle. Power imbalances in funding. We see that funding opportunities exist, yet youth led movements are often excluded from accessing them. Why? Because funding structures reflect colonial hierarchies. Decision making power is concentrated in donor countries, and rigid application requires it makes it nearly impossible for grassroots organizations to receive direct funding. Resource exploitation. The economic model we operate in today still mirrors colonial extraction. Global majority nations provide raw materials to feed the industries of global north, while our economies remain dependent on this cycle. Without equitable control over our own resources, true decolonization remains out of reach. Marginal, marginalization of local voices. Despite all the talk about localization in global development, we still see the dominance of external experts over the voices of those who actually experience the impact of colonial legacies. Youth and local actors are constantly sidelined in political discussions, reducing our participation to tokenism representation rather than meaningful influence. Cultural hegemony. Decolonization is not just about political, it is also cultural. Western epistemologies and governance models continue to dominate, erasing indigenous knowledge systems and alternative ways of structuring society. True decolonization requires the recognition and validation of diverse worldviews rather than the continued imposition of a singular framework. Lack of structural reform. Many so called decolonization policies are surface level. They address symptoms, but they do not tackle the root causes, the very institutions that maintain colonial power structures. Without deep structural reform in governance, education, international relations, we are simply repackaging the same systems under a different name. Last, tokenism and localization and operational inefficiencies. And finally, localization efforts often fail to deliver real change. Instead of shifting powers, they become bureaucratic exercises where youth and local actors are required in discussions but denied actual decision making power. Operational inefficiencies, whether through mismanagement, lack of accountability, bureaucratic roadblocks, further slow down any real progress. Now I will hand over the mic to Meg.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Yes? Okay. I need to apologize in advance because we had a few power shutdowns today, so my connection is not the best. But I wanted to show my face for a second, then I'll turn my camera off. So I'm Margherita Devella. I'm originally from Italy, but at the moment I'm based in Somalia, where I'm a research officer for a monitoring and evaluation and research organization for the humanitarian sector. And my background is in international relations, conflict resolution, but then I specialized in transitional justice. And I've been involved with YTN since August, September. So I'm just very grateful and honest to stand in front of all of you guys today. So many young people, and I've also noticed in the chat from such different geographical backgrounds as well. So thank you for joining us today. Building on what Shital, I'm just gonna turn my camera off to ensure connection. So yeah, I just wanted to build on what like Shital just discussed and say that what you find in our policy brief is, among other things, also a discussion of one of the most transformative aspects of youth engagement in peace building, which is the youth, peace, and security agenda. So from our perspective, this agenda is not just about including young people in discussions, it's about recognizing them as essential drivers of change in conflict prevention, in peace building, in governance. So what we try to answer and include in the policy brief about the YTS agenda is some answers to this question. So why does it matter? How is it like connected to decolonization, which is one of our core pillars? And so I thought of giving you just a quick overview of the agenda. So the YPS agenda emerged as a game changer in peace building, as a true transformative framework. And more importantly, it emerged from years of youth advocacy that pushed for a seat at the table in global peace and security efforts for young people. So finally, in 2015, the UN Security Council adopted Resolution 2250, which basically recognized young people as key players in in conflict resolution, in peace building, and overall in decision making processes. So what's the most important thing to mention is that like it's based on five core principles, five key pillars, which are participation, protection, prevention, partnerships, and reintegration. Participation is basically about ensuring young people have a real say in governance, policies, and like peace process in general. Protection is, however, more about safeguarding youth from like at the local level from violence, from being recruited into armed groups and displacement, which unfortunately, as we probably all know, it's still a big trend nowadays. The pillar about prevention is more about supporting youth-led initiatives to address the root causes of conflicts at the local level, thanks to very localized and in-country knowledge. And partnership is about strengthening collaboration between let's say, youth, governments, and international organizations in general to provide youth with opportunities, but also with like a space where to actually bring their fresh perspectives, new ideas, and like their voices in general. And reintegration, lastly, it's about helping young people affected by conflict rebuild their lives. And this is often done like through reintegration programs, giving them employment opportunities, providing them with like support programs, education also is very important. So overall, since 2015, the YPS framework has been strengthened and many different other resolutions were introduced, pushing for governments to integrate youth voices into policymaking, establishing advisory boards, and just like really developing real strategies for youth involvement. So you're going to see in the policy brief, but we identified some key aspects within which I think you can actually, move on to the next slide. Sorry. Thank you, Manvir. Thank you very much. So I was saying, like, we identified certain areas where youth-led movements are actively achieving change. They are challenging structural inequalities. They're building local solutions through their very localized and knowledge. They're challenging externally imposed peace processes, again, thanks to their in-country knowledge and them being oftentimes close to the ground, close to the real realities they're facing, and they're advocating for inclusive justice as well. I think overall what is important to mention within the YPS is that it tries to shift the perspective. So it challenges outdated ideas, especially in post-colonial societies, where young people have been like historically sidelined. So it tries not to portray them as victims or as potential sources of instability and violence, and it rather portrays them as leaders in peace and development, which we all think is very important. But despite like many improvements, we did identify many gaps and challenges. There are many elements that are still missing, so we still have a long way to go. So while the YPS agendas made big progress, we identified, and some of these, as Jay already mentioned, lack of funding as one of the key problems. So youth-led initiatives often rely on short-term donor support, which makes it hard to sustain in the long term and in longer term peace efforts as well. And you'll find many case studies, many examples within the policy brief, but one of them is Iraq, that we mentioned, and where youth-led reconciliation work in Mosul had to stall when international funding dried up. So these are the sad realities, and gives us like a lot of also motivation to find solutions. So a second challenge is the exclusion from decision making. So yeah, it's about many youth groups being invited to participate, but actually being given very little or way too little real power to shape policies and impact their lives. And a third major challenge that I can mention is systemic barriers. So how structural issues like restrictive laws, limited access to education, for instance, weak society institutions, how all of these factors, these dimensions make it really hard for youth movements to actually thrive. And this is very much the case in a post-colonial context. So one of the last things I'm going to say, because I'm sure you're going to read way more about it in the policy brief, so I don't want to spoil it too much, is that at its core, the YPS agenda is about giving young people the tools, the spaces, and authority to lead change. It's not just about being included for us, but it's about youth leading the way towards a more just and decolonized future. So we identify some challenges. We provide solutions as well in the policy brief, and we try to do it as much as possible with a very fresh perspective, because at the end of the day, that's one of our main strengths. So we try to keep that in mind while we were writing, and I really hope it's going to surprise you guys. I'll give the floor to Shital again. She's going to conclude the presentation about the policy brief.
Thank you, Meg. Now that we have outlined the progresses, challenges, and the gaps, what are the solutions? How do we move beyond these systemic barriers? At YTN, we advocate for 5 core recommendations that can drive real youth led decolonization change. Flexible long term funding. We need to reform the way funding is distributed. Youth led organizations require direct access to long term flexible funding mechanisms that allow us to set our own priorities. Youth inclusion in decision making. Young people must not just be consulted, but embedded in global structures. Dismantling barriers to empowerment. Education and legal support are crucial. Youth need free, quality education that includes decolonization perspectives. Capacity building and mentorship. Empowerment comes from skills and knowledge. Investing in mentorship programs, training workshops, and networking opportunities ensure that youth leaders are equipped to drive sustainable change. Support grassroots community led solutions. Finally, the most effective decolonization effort comes from the ground up. International institutions need to shift from a top down approach to amplify and support local youth led initiatives. Hence, decolonization must be driven by those who live in its realities. In closing, decolonization is not just a historical process, it is an ongoing struggle that requires bold systemic change. As youth, we are at the forefront of this movement, challenging power structures, advocating for economic justice, and reclaiming the narratives that have long been dictated to us. But we cannot do this alone. We need structural support, real inclusion, and dismantling the colonial systems that still shape our world. Thank you. Now I give the floor back to Balkis.
Yes, thank you so much to both of you, Meg and Chital, for walking us through this presentation. I hope this was a helpful, just quick rundown of the policy brief for everyone. Like I said, it is up now and live on our website. You have the link in the chat. Obviously, the policy brief is way more detailed. There's a lot of thought and good research that went through that into that. So I invite you all to take a look, read it, let us know what you think. Like I said, we'd be very, very happy to just hear your thoughts. And with that, we have concluded our presentation, and we would wanted to take the few minutes that we have left as really more of an interactive Q&A portion where we listen to your questions, we try to respond to them, and really have a discussion with a lot of the amazing young people we have with us today about everything that we've talked about. I saw that we have a few comments in the chat, and I'll get back to those in a bit. But in the meantime, I actually wanted to start with a question to Shital, which is about the need to address decolonization today. Why is that very important from your own research, you know, coming from India as well as a young female in the field?
Um, like we mentioned in the policy brief and in discussions, decolonization still remains necessary because sovereignty alone does not dismantle all of the structures that were put in by the colonial rulers. There are economic structures, political structures, cultural structures, especially when we think about the fact that we use English as one of the languages to communicate among so many countries, which is also something which was left behind by colonial power. And many post colonial states continue to face neocolonial resource exploitation, funding imbalances, and systemic marginalized voices. It limits true self determination. It limits the fact that people living in the global south need to match the standards of people living in the global north to try and share the resources, even though people in the global south are facing realities that people in the global north do not have to. Without structural reforms and equitable presentation and youth led solutions in localized spaces, colonial legacies will still persist, reinforcing global inequalities.
Definitely, 1,000%. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And I agree a lot also about the point of language. I always say, you know, one of the ways we need to really decolonize is to try to shift to where we can have more local discussions in our own, you know, indigenous languages. And I know that's not something obviously easy to do because unfortunately not we don't speak every language in the world. But yeah, English and French and more of these colonial languages are still very present today. Um, in our, you know, own cultures, and I always use Tunisia as an example, where I know our Arabic dialect is really mostly half of it is in French or French words. Either we take them directly or we change them a bit, but they're still originally French from the French colonial period back home. So thank you for that answer, Chital. And I do also have a question that I received for Meg, and it is about how you see this policy brief helping young people in their work.
Uh, oh, can you hear me? Yes. Okay. So I think, thank you for the question, first of all. I think it's a really good question. That's why we're here today. I think it's a double answer. So like, I think the foundation, it's about informing young people. So providing them with the document where they can become like a reference point for them. In a way, it's also not just about informing them about like tangible things, but it's also about like, making them feel that there are people who are thinking these things and they're taking into consideration their challenges and they're actively trying to find a solution and to address these challenges, which I think is very important. As a young person, oftentimes I also like it helped me understand that there were other people, especially also within YTN, that were facing the same challenges or were striving to achieve the same goals. So in a way, this policy brief helps that. And again, yeah, it can become like a reference point, somewhere to look for people, for youth who are engaging, for instance, in advocacy work. And so they can go back to this reference document to as a starting point, really. So yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, but that was like the main idea at least. And then I guess from there, something else can spark as well, because we also want to kind of trigger a discussion with this document. So it's not limited to the document. It's also about like the spaces that are gonna possibly get created after people read this and like the discussions that will spark, hopefully.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with you. And to add to what you said, I would also encourage everyone to disseminate it. So if you're, are passionate about decolonization work, or you feel like you can connect to a lot of the challenges that we have outlined in a very detailed way in the policy brief, please share that with other young people who might feel the same, or share it with maybe those who don't feel that these still exist today, because as I said earlier, when talking about YTN, we still have that north-south gap, unfortunately, and a lot of our lived realities might not be relatable to other young people from other parts of the world. I know here where I'm based in Geneva, I actually had a discussion with someone who wasn't even aware that it's hard for the young people from the majority countries to obtain visas to enter Europe. Um, which was mind-blowing to me. But then I realized, there are certain realities that we need to continue to uncover and to highlight and to say that they still exist even in a world and that where it shouldn't, right? Especially today, we're in 2025, and I know, at least even from my work in human rights, that a lot of young people are denied entry to countries where they are holding major conferences just because of their nationality or the work that they're doing. Um, so thank you, Margarita, for answering that. I saw a comment from Margaret that I found really interesting. She talked about how, as a humanitarian, believes that in order to include the best possible way to decolonization in project policy is to focus on nationalization of the projects and the expertise of grassroots and local organizations. And that actually also directly tackles what we talk about in the policy brief as well, but with decolonization as a mission. Because for YTN, like I said earlier, our core work principles are also around localization, inclusion, and youth leadership. And so we also believe that for decolonization to take place and for it to be effectively and efficiently implemented in a lot of countries, we do need to resort more to localized efforts. So we definitely 1,000% agree with you. But then practically on the ground, though, we have to admit that there are difficulties with doing that. And so the question is, how can we as young people, push for policies and agendas where localization is at the core, but is also easily accessible and easily implemented so we can actually arrive to better results, right, and consequences. And on that note, I wanted to highlight something else from at least my work, where I noticed that a lot of major big donor organizations or countries or governments are now using localization as in a tokenistic way, just like they do for youth involvement and youth engagement. And so it's important that we hold them accountable so that when they try to localize, their projects, they actually are doing it. It's not only words on paper to make it look like, this is a more community-friendly project. So I just wanted to add on that note. I know a lot of you in the chat also agreed with the fact that lack of youth in decision making is an issue, and unfortunately it continues to be. Many of you also agreed that dismantling barriers is very important, which is also very true. And I saw that we did have two questions actually for Shital. So Shital, the first one is about you being based in Brussels, as Margaret is also based in Brussels, and you find that problematic in impacting your professional integration in Belgium. So the work that you're doing with YTN, basically.
I would say definitely that it's not something that pushes forward because a lot of people don't really like to talk about decolonization in the global north. They find it as like a taboo subject, especially when I walk around Brussels and still see places like Leopold Park and Edmond de Boo. And it's always just the fact that from the global south, when somebody sees something like this, it really impacts our worldview. But people who already are based here are just like, oh, it's just a park or it's just a spot. But the impact of that is truly visible for us. And in terms of work itself, I would say yes, it definitely hinders a bit, especially when you are applying for jobs and stuff, comparing to other global north applicants. because there are a lot of jobs that don't want to sponsor a visa, but they want someone that specializes in African countries or about Latin America. And it's like, you have candidates from Latin America or from African countries, but you would rather hire someone from the global north who wants to learn about it rather than someone who's lived it.
Very, very good points. And I think that's applicable really to a lot of other countries, unfortunately. Of course, we cannot generalize because there are still, young people within those communities who are looking forward to these discussions. But I do agree that that's a challenge, I think, that we see very common across many countries in the global north. There's also a question from Anna on translating the policy to other languages. Definitely, we are at YTN, at least we're trying our best to incorporate other languages. And so we will be trying in the future to not only translate the policy brief, but also the website, everything that we have there, any information. We've had discussions on translating it to Swahili, to Arabic, to Portuguese. So, I mean, if any of you actually here in the call today, you're interested in supporting that work and translating these types of content that are really, really important for a lot of young people, please reach out to us. Ibtisam will put our admin email in the chat in case you want to help with that. But we definitely want to translate the website and everything we have on it, because we also want to make sure that, we're walking the talk, right? We're not just saying we need to shift language, but we actually work on it. But again, that's also not very easy, unfortunately, even due to the fact that a lot of work that young people do is on a voluntary basis, right? Especially the work that matters, but it's also very time consuming. However, that remains one of our priorities, and we will be working on it. There was also a comment from Shema who said that decolonizing policymaking is the only way to address historical injustice as we live in a post-colonial world. It allows us to prioritize local knowledge, empower historically excluded voices, and develop inclusive solutions, definitely. And again, that's really what we aim to do here at YTN, at least. And we do have a question from Laura about the legal frameworks that we shared in the policy brief. I don't know, Margarita or Shital, if you just want to quickly talk about that, because I know this part was tackled by a different policy officer, but if you have anything that you want to share regarding that.
Well, I could just say something quickly because it was definitely done by the two lawyers in our policy team. But legal protections exist, but they still face implementation challenges, especially because when it comes from bigger organizational structures like the UN, the national governments don't really seek to implement them because then they, I would say, don't intersect well with the country's own interests. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of work in decolonization is still policy based rather than legal based.
Yeah, definitely. And I would just add to that that even the regional frameworks, the legal regional frameworks that we can interact with, unfortunately, from at least my own research, don't even have the accurate, I'll put it this way, they don't have the accurate infrastructure needed to tackle such work yet, because they're still themselves, from my own opinion at least, this is not reflective of YTN, but my own, that those regional frameworks are in themselves influenced by colonial legacies. And so even the regional frameworks that we think aren't need to be reconstructed to begin with before we can incorporate this work into them. But I've done a lot of work on some of them, and I've seen from my own research that they don't really have the infrastructure, the capacity, the funding, the people. It's really a lot of work that they might not be well equipped to do as of now, or as of 2024 when I first done this research. Um, so let us,
Um,
yes, sorry, go.
Fabi?
Yes, Margarita, go ahead.
yes. No, I just wanted to say that, like, I think this is also very interconnected with what we were saying before. So the fact, like, inclusion, like the theme of today, really. So inclusion of youth. So the problem is that it's also this might be like a very simplistic answer as well, but oftentimes like these policies um, don't really reflect realities on the ground. They're very much like top down instead of bottom up. So that's also something that we argue in the policy brief after listing like the different efforts, like also legally to counter and address for decolonization. And so including youth voices, that's what we try to argue within these things, also make the legal instruments themselves better. Because they bring them closer to local realities. And yeah, just wanted to add this. I think it's very simple thought, but important to be mentioned nonetheless. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. And I think all of these, even, if they seem simple kind of responses, they need to be mentioned because something else that we need to keep in mind when it comes to decolonization work is that it's also a very heavy topic. And a lot of our ideas, I guess, get lost in between. And so the more we vocalize them, the better it is for the work itself. And another point to keep in mind is that also a lot of young people might be doing this type of work, but they're not aware that there is a way to code it, that they're not aware that this is decoloniality work, right? And I've noticed this a lot with recruiting volunteers for YTN or even just simply having those conversations where young people are not aware that this framework does exist, although they're doing this exact same work. And so they really, really are very happy most of the time to find out that this does exist and that, their work actually falls in under it. And so, yeah, I mean, please vocalize, any idea, whatever it is, even if it seems a bit too simple, maybe. Um, we've had another question. I think I've lost it in here. We've had a comment from Imran who talked about the EU visa policies for African states. Unfortunately, that continues really to be the case for everyone. And he said he has experience as a Kenyan citizen of Somali descent. We had a question from Solit as well, where he asked if there are examples of emerging best practices in decolonization, particularly in the global south. So we do share examples, and if I'm not wrong, I think Iraq is one of them in the Middle East, but correct me, Shital and Meg, if I'm wrong. But yes, there are a lot of examples. We've talked about a couple of them in the policy brief. They're more under, like success stories sort of example. And if you go, I think, through the midsection of the policy brief, you'll be able to see them there.
Yeah, just to confirm, I think like Iraq is one of the major ones. So it's a case study that we analyzed that you're going to find in the policy brief. And then we try to keep the geographical scope like as wide as possible, really. So you're going to find other examples from the global south as well. We mentioned Rwanda too. But yeah, you'll find them in the document itself. And also like networks of like young people coming together remotely, which is a new but very important trend that makes things easier oftentimes. So we mentioned those movements as well, yes, as examples.
Great, awesome. And I know we have another question from Natasha about partnering with youth organizations, schools, and universities, and if YTN is planning to do something beyond the policy brief. So to respond to your first question, yes, we're definitely open for partnerships, and we've been partnering with, I think, we've had discussions at least with 3 different organizations in the past few weeks. And we would love to partner with other youth networks that are interested in this work because, just like we want to work together to push for the agenda, we also want to share the knowledge that we have because these best practices are really, really helpful in pushing the agenda forward, especially in communities where the discussion on this isn't even there yet. So yes, if you or anyone really in the call would like to partner with YTN or knows an organization that would benefit a lot or a group of young people who would benefit from this work, then we'll be happy to talk to them. And we do a lot besides the policy brief. We're planning workshops. I know we've had a few in the past. We're conducting research. We're planning advocacy campaigns. We're working on workshops for youth, peace, and security. So yeah, there's a lot in the making for sure. And I was going to share that at the end, but just so that I don't spoil it, yes, there's so much going on. The policy brief is one of many activities that we're working on as YTN. And on that note, I also wanted to invite you to check our website under the policy work. You'll see that the great team here not only worked on the policy brief, but they have a couple of blog posts that they wrote within the same theme. And so you'll find a lot of amazing ones. And so if you go to the same link, you'll basically be able to see them there. And I think we have about a few more minutes, maybe for one or two more questions. We've had one from Ahmed who talked about how some developing countries, particularly in Africa, depend on other countries' policies instead of elevating youth powers and build leaders in their home countries. Why does this happen? Um, I think the reason this continues to happen is the very fact that the governance, the political processes, that the mechanisms within those countries are still following or at least, even if they're not following the colonial legacies that they've had in the past, they're still influenced by them. And it's very, very important right now to understand and recognize that you can dismantle these barriers overnight. It takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of effort and engagement. And so even when we try to do this work now, we might actually even never live to see the impact of it because it takes many, many years for it to be implemented. And so even if those countries, that are seem to be developed or developing or doing better, or their economies are growing within Africa or outside of Africa, and they come from global majority countries, their policies are still influenced in one way or another. And it's very, very hard to break away from that influence because usually it's very deeply rooted in our societies and our policies and our governments, which is why, we still continue to see how they're not including young people. And the lack of inclusion of young people doesn't only happen, I think, in African countries. I know a lot of other countries, even the global north actually, who even if seemingly they are including their young generation in decision making, when you look into it in depth and when you zoom at what they're doing, it's very tokenistic. And so don't really fall for the whole, we're a developed country and we're doing well and we're including young people. Usually decision making is still within the global, older majority in their own countries. Yeah, so I just wanted to add a note on that. So I think we'll probably have to wrap up for now. Thank you everyone for all of your questions. I think they're great, and I see that there are a few more in the chat, but they are actually answered in our policy brief. And so I invite you all to take a look at it, see if the content there is really able to answer your question. And if not, again, please reach out to us. Would be very, very happy to talk to you all and to see ways we can engage with you and also be able to address your questions, whatever they are. On this note, I think we can conclude. I just really wanted to remind you all that you can visit our website, you can visit our socials, you'll find them in the chat. Please do download the policy brief, share it with other people. In the policy brief, also the names are clickable. So every name there can take you to the LinkedIn profile of the person. So if you want to connect with Margarita, Shital, or anyone else from the policy team, you can add them on LinkedIn. They're great people, though I haven't met them in person yet, but that's the beauty of our remote work and the fact that we're a global team here at YTN. Please stay tuned for our upcoming events. We have a lot coming up with across all of our different teams, but also within the policy team. So they'll continue posting their blogs, you'll continue seeing their entries and their thoughts, and you can interact with them on our website. I think, yeah, this is mostly what I wanted to share when it comes to YTN. Just overall, make sure that you are following our socials and you take a look at our website every now and then, because we always have something going on, whether an event, whether a call for volunteers, or just, a new work that we have posted there. And as we come to an end for this incredible event, I really want to take a moment to again thank each and every one of you for being part of this milestone. Thank you for taking the time as well on a Saturday to be with us. I want to give a huge clap for the amazing YTN team, not only the policy one, but everyone within the team who has worked really tirelessly to make sure that our event is run smoothly. And of course, for the policy team who persisted despite a lot of challenges to get this work done. I know all of young people's presence, engagement, commitment, they really remind us of why this work matters. And so please don't take today as just another event. It really is the beginning, and the policy brief is more than words on paper, and it shouldn't be the case. For us at YTN, it's a call for action. It's a tool for advocacy. It's a foundation for partnerships. And so we hope we can establish lasting change with that. And yeah, this is our time. We're just getting started. Hopefully together we'll be able to at least improve our futures a bit, where we can shape and live in a decolonial, youth-led future that we all believe in. Thank you again for being part of this journey. Let's go out there, make this change happen, and I hope to see many of you in the next event. Thank you, everyone. Take care. Please be safe. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.